Everyone. Okay, let's get started. Thank you for joining us today for the Snack Along webinar on ORAT. Just mentioning the housekeeping items briefly. This presentation is a bit longer than usual. We're a 45-minute session with a 30-minute presentation followed by around 15 minutes of Q&A. So there will be time for the Q&A. Please log your questions in the question box and we will address them at the end. And also the presentations are available to download in the handout box as a PDF. I will now hand it over to David and Jamie to start the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Again, as Sharon mentioned, we are really talking today on the Snack and Learn webinar about operational readiness and really how WSP here in the US has kind of morphed the process to adapt to different conditions and looking at aviation infrastructure projects within an active airport environment. My name is David Gruber. I'm Assistant Vice President for Operational Readiness with WSP here in the US. I have worked at the Atlanta Airport as part of the WSP program management team for the last 8 years, but I've been here in Atlanta since 2007 and been involved with the ORAT process for a number of our large capital projects, including our consolidated rental car facility, as well as our international terminal complex, which included a new international terminal, Concourse, and parking decks. Presenting with me today is Jamie Tapp, so I'll let Jamie introduce herself.
Hi, good morning. My name is Jamie Tapp. I'm a director at the City of Atlanta Department of Aviation, in charge of operational readiness now. I've been at the airport a very long time. I've had multiple roles. This is my favorite currently, helping out our leadership team and our capital development team in its implementation. So glad to be here and talk about our favorite topic today.
So this is our agenda. Really, we just want to touch, give everyone a little background on Hartsfield-Jackson, talk about the traditional ORAT methodology, how we at WSP have kind of, again, inserted a few things into the typical project life cycle, and really talk about the process of interim operational readiness and operational coordination through some case studies here in Atlanta, and then we'll have time at the end for some question and answer. So Jamie's going to talk a little bit about Hartsfield-Jackson as a whole.
Fantastic. So this slide just shows us a little bit about ATL by the numbers. I'll give you a bit of an orientation. The things that stick out to me first are those green rectangles. Those are our 5 runways. We've got 2 on the north complex, 2 in the center complex, and then 1 on the south. Those 5 runways allow for us to have 196 passenger gates, and those are shown on those vertical yellow concourses. We've got 7 concourses, just under 7 million square feet of concourse space. That's where our planes attached to our building and let passengers come and go off the airplanes. Those red, pinkish rectangles are our 2 terminals. We've got a domestic terminal to the west and an international terminal to the east. And then you can see around underneath the photograph that we are really a constrained airport. We've got 4,700 acres on our entire campus, and we're constrained with 3 interstate systems all around our airport. So we've got a lot of activity happening on a very small package. We've got 2 different train systems. You'll learn about one of them later on in one of our case studies. A train system that connects our domestic passenger to our rental car facility, and shown there in that blue going underneath the concourses, we've got a people mover system that connects our 2 terminals to all of our 7 concourses. So that's just trying to lay it out to explain how what a small size we have with a lot of activity. We handle approximately 300,000 passengers every day through our facility. It's a lot of people. We have a plane taking off or landing approximately every 40 seconds all day long. And obviously we handle a lot of metric tons of cargo. We've got 150 domestic destinations, 70 plus international destinations, and that is growing. And we always like to brag that we can reach 80% of the United States population within a 2-hour flight from our airport. Last year, we processed 104 million passengers in 2023. This year, we expect that number to be closer to 110 million passengers. So we are the busiest in the world. We also like to add into that we are the most efficient as well. So you'll hear us often talking about being the busiest and most efficient airport, trying to put obviously a lot of activity into this one facility. You can see this there compared to some other fast-growing airports. But all that activity, all that both operations and passenger impact require a lot of construction at our part to just keep our facility going. So part of our capital, I want to give you a baseline of our capital improvement program right now. We bundle our projects into 3 different categories, whether they're focused on renewal and replacement, our capacity increases, or customer service. Renewal and replacement, the majority of our facility, terminal and concourses, are almost 40 years old. So we have a lot of projects that are focusing on that renewal and replacement, including utility plants, new parking, vehicle parking infrastructure. You'll see one of those in our case study later as well. And a lot of concourse-wide development, passenger boarding bridges, electrical distribution, ceiling lighting, all that is renewal and replacement. Our second category are capacity increases. These projects allow us to grow, allow us to accommodate our increases in both operations and passenger growth. This includes our plane training tunnel. You'll hear about that as one of our case studies here. We've done some capacity increases with and around taxiways, extension of our Concourse D building. We've added 5 gates in the last couple of years for that. David will also talk a lot today about Concourse D widening. One of our concourses is more narrow than the others, and we're fixing that. We're making it, we're adding a lot of capacity there. So that's our second category of capital improvement projects. And our last are projects that focus on customer service, trying to increase the passenger experience. Again, we're putting a lot of people through this facility, and we're trying to do it with the best experience possible. We're embarking on a large restroom enhancement project now, where we're not only updating the current facilities, but we're actually growing our capacity, as well as other midpoint expansions and other airside modernizations. So those are our 3 categories of projects in our capital program. This slide I wanted to show the scale of our program. We're a large airport, busy airport, and we have a very large and growing capital improvement program. Currently, it's sitting at about $12 billion. This is constantly changing as we are evaluating projects constantly. In 2023, we put in over $1 billion of work in the ground at our airport, and that spend rate, build rate is projected to continue over the next few years. We're planning on putting just over $1 billion in fiscal year 2024 and doing that for the next 3 years. So between 25 and 29, we expect to spend $4 billion in our capital improvement program. So all this is just to say that we're a large, complex passenger hub with a relative small physical area for size, with a lot of people going through our facility. So as we try to do these complex projects, they have intense and real passenger impacts that we're charged with trying to mitigate those impacts as we build. That's why ORAT is so important at Hartsfield-Jackson.
Well, and that's actually a great lead-in. Thank you, Jamie, for, as you saw from that, with 142 active projects and probably 3 times that on the books for consideration, ORAT has really grown here through the WSP program in Atlanta. And as everyone knows, ORAT has become kind of well adapted in the airport community. It is that collaborative process that ensures that successful transition between construction and opening day, while ensuring that all stakeholders are ready for opening day and beyond. So that always seems to run into kind of the potential conflict between the contractor scope, which is to build the physical asset, doing it safely, efficiently, on schedule, and to the contract, and the owner's scope, which has to do with making sure that its people, its stakeholders, its operations team are ready to not only do their job efficiently and successfully, but meet the design intent and the operational intent of any new facility. So again, that concept is pretty well enacted here at Hartsfield-Jackson through our work with WSP and the airport. And obviously those key elements go into, again, standard operating procedures, contingency planning, system commissioning, training for people on equipment, services, operational functionality, through trials, exercises, and ultimately large simulations, but then also making sure that all the stakeholders are aware of all the activities, that they're engaged, that they know what's happening with each of the capital projects and can make the necessary adjustments, whether to opening day or any changes. And then another key part of this is obviously a lessons learned at the end, so that we can take things that have happened with openings and try to replicate the successes and mitigate any of the potential less than successful operations. So again, this is, as we talked, the traditional ORAT lifecycle. So throughout the project, ORAT starts in the planning process with the engagement of stakeholders, carries through design, really intense during construction as you get ready for the transfer and acceptance. So that is, again, the traditional approach. What WSP has done here in Atlanta is really introduce those kind of two red circles above the construction line. And that has to do with impact mitigation and operational coordination. Those within the complex of a very small, as Jamie pointed out, but very dynamic environment have really become a focal point of what WSP, as part of the program management team here, has been working on over the course of the last 8 years. So we kind of have taken an approach of starting off with a general mapping of all the projects. So this is a very small snapshot over the last year and a half looking forward of where all the different project activities and or their associated impacts are taking place here on the airport complex. So this mapping allows us to see project adjacencies, view potential conflicts, look at potential operational impacts associated with all of the different construction projects. We are then able to kind of drill this down into a little more detail, and we'll show again how that works. But we're able to take snapshots of individual phases or individual portions or specific projects and look at them through a mapping process that shows, again, where they're located, where their physical footprint is at via, like in this case, a polygon, and then what potential impacts there are. So as you see in the upper left-hand photo, this kind of takes a snapshot of a baggage carousel replacement project that's underway, in which we're replacing carousels within our North Terminal baggage claim area. It gives us a very high-level look at the impact start dates and impact finish dates for each of the carousels. And then as shown in the lower right-hand, we're able to take that information and distill it down even more so that we can see the actual operational impact. In this case, it was a gate closure to move some existing sanitary and water lines. It shows, again, within that snapshot, what the impact start date, what the impact finish date was. But if we were to click on that closure text, it would then expand out to show us all the different areas that are impacted, which specific airline, what mitigation steps took place, whether it was relocation of the airline to a different gate, any temporary signage that we may have put in place, whether there was IT connectivity that had to support that. So all of that really worked through, again, the mapping software, which starts our process here in terms of looking at operational coordination and interim readiness. So as we do that, again, looking at interim operational readiness and coordination, we really look at anything that impacts the airport operations, whether that's passenger movement, aircraft, airlines. We also look at adjacent construction projects to make sure that there's not a conflict between what each of them want to do. As part of this then, as I said, we look at that, identify closures and relocations, and then get together in the same collaborative process we use under the traditional ORAT methodology and talk with different stakeholders to develop mitigation plans and then work with what's necessary to implement those. So you see all the different things that we look at, whether it's customer service, temporary signage, communication outreach, traffic control, support from the contractor themselves, and then how do we then develop that plan and implement that plan? So what we want to do is kind of show and share a couple case studies with you of things and how this has taken place with the WSP program here in Atlanta. The first of these is our domestic terminal landside modernization program. The most significant of this is where we constructed canopies over the roadways at both our north and south domestic terminals. So as you can see from the photo, these canopies are roughly 864 feet long, which is 263 meters, 195 feet or 59 meters wide, and they extend 74 feet or 222.5 meters over our roadways. So this really kicked off the WSP operational coordination aspect of what we do now, in that we had to construct all of this while still maintaining operations of the domestic terminals. So we had to still move passengers, we still had to move vehicular traffic and everything through the airport. So it was a continuous study of how passengers would be impacted as the canopy had to be constructed, different areas that would be off limits, and how passengers would navigate around and constantly changing an environment. So we developed some graphics to help communicate this to our internal and external stakeholders. It involves showing them, again, in this case, how we would shut different doors for different activities and how passengers would move, which is shown in what for us is a pretty standard yellow passenger path, and then show different roadway lane closures to represent what was available for passengers and vehicles throughout the construction project. In conjunction with that, we also created diagrams and illustrations for internal stakeholders who operated within the terminal areas each night. So we showed, based upon how the steel was being erected, areas that would be simply off limits due to safety, and again, showing visually to stakeholders how that would look. And again, this took place constantly over, in some cases it was a daily update, it was weekly updates, it was monthly look aheads, just again to inform the stakeholder community and the public of how things would change. So that's one of our studies. I'm going to have Jamie talk about our plane train tunnel extension as another example of this process.
Thanks. This is a very exciting and complicated construction project. We could talk for hours just on the how this was actually constructed, but we'll focus here on our operational coordination that we did for this. As I mentioned earlier, our airport has a people mover system that connects our two terminals and goes to all of our concourses. The way that was constructed 40 years ago, it's in a pinched loop system, but at one of the ends, the train actually has to backtrack for a few seconds on an existing track, and that allows, it doesn't allow the next train to move forward. So one way that we can gain some operational efficiency was to actually extend our pinched loop farther to the west, and that allows our trains to operate more efficiently. So it's a large scope of an extension, but it doesn't even include a new station. Most passengers won't even know we've done this. They'll still code at the exact same stations that they've always gone to, but this will give us some additional capacity in our train system. But that it really comes down to extending our train underneath our domestic terminal. So we have to blast through rock to get there. It included a whole additional escalator and a whole new bank of elevators at our main domestic baggage claim station. And so they had significant passenger impacts. We had to figure out a way to maintain passenger flow, especially for passengers that required elevators, whether it was strollers or wheelchairs, during construction. And then we had to make sure that we could pull passengers and get them to where they needed to be despite all of this closure. So for over almost 2 full years, we had impacts at our domestic station with no vertical circulation, as well, or no elevator circulation. We had escalators, and then also pull passengers off at our Concourse D station as well to make sure that they could get there. So here's in the diagram below, you can see the large escalators that we had. We had 3. We currently built a 4th. The project team had to actually provide structure for the whole entire building as we were blasting underneath it. So underneath this picture is where we were extending the train. And then can we go to the next one? We have, again, our diagrams that we use for our internal and external stakeholders to show the passenger movements, where we would have them both during the 24-hour operations as well as nighttime closures, how we would relocate the up escalators and down escalators. We would arrange as needed for this project. We wanted to make sure we had additional signage for people to actually know where they had to exit if they needed to use an escalator or an elevator. It was very complicated. And then this is more diagrams in our the main terminal building that shows some passenger flows. It shows some additional signs and also the locations of additional customer service reps that we provided to make sure our passengers could get to where they needed to go. So this is one example of some of the impact mitigation that we provided.
Yeah, so thanks, Jimmy. So that, again, that was an extremely passenger impactful operation that we did and had to work with our stakeholders here to make sure that there was a successful plan to, again, ensure passengers could access the areas that they needed. Another project that is ongoing right now is our Concourse D widening. Some of you may have sat in on the webinar that we did on this. This is a very unique project in that it deals with modular construction off-site, that we then transport sections of the building across our airfield and then place them at our new, or what is a widened Concourse D. So we are widening, lengthening, and increasing the height and clear span of our operational and active concourse. So to do that, we're dealing again with how do we do temporary operations plans for airlines? How do we, when we close their gates for periods of time, where do we position them, and then what's necessary to support that? And then we do more of some of the traditional stuff under the ORAT umbrella, but it's different because as we open each of these phases, some are opening in interim conditions where we may not have turned over all the building systems just because they have to tie into modules that aren't there. And so we're looking at, again, how do we do interim readiness plans, and how do we make the process of the handover smoother and more efficient? And so we want to share a couple of things that we've done here. So this was one of the interim projects or interim plans we had to develop, in which we're closing a couple gates and access to a fuel island. And that's to relocate utilities away from the existing building so they would not be under the footprint of the widened building. And so again, you see that we had to develop some graphics for internal airport stakeholders to show them exactly what was closed, show them how their path would change and how they would be impacted during this operation. And again, just where we would have access to the fuel island and some other things. Another thing that we've done under the WSP program here is looked at ways to streamline really the ORAT process in general. So with this, as we've widened the concourse and we've added the modules, under an interim handover condition, we obviously had to do traditional fit checks, but we have to do also, gate hold room checks for temporary systems and how we do this. So this is some software that we've used so we can go out in the field and basically field check things, immediately get a readiness score, and understand things that may or may not have to change as part of any of the pre-opening activities to get us ready, again, to open all these gates back up while still getting ready for the next phase of construction. So that is a little bit about our de-widening. Jamie's going to cover another project that we're doing here, which is the South Terminal parking deck.
This is a very timely project. We're doing a big operational impact in less than 48 hours. So we're focused on this now. We are currently under construction with a 6,700 stall large parking deck for our passengers. It's decks that we're building at the Atlanta airport. It's on our south.
Oh.
I'm going to turn off my camera in case that's making it worse. I promise I'm still here.
There you go.
I promise I'm still here. So this is an exciting project. That's a current photo there that's shown on this slide. We're trying to coordinate the passenger operations during construction, both from our roadway network. We'll have to connect the roads into this new deck soon. But first we have to connect the passengers from this deck into our building. So we're going to do a large pedestrian bridge there. The lift of that steel starts happening this Saturday night. This is a drawing showing that new bridge as we build it. You can see the canopies David talked about earlier in the background. This connects to the west side of our domestic terminal building. The pedestrian bridge is large enough that we have to do crane lifts in 3 different sections. This first section shown in purple is what begins Saturday. The crane locations are impacting our entire south side roadway network where those cars are here, as well as our west ground transportation center. So we're going to have significant closures this Saturday night. This first one shown in purple, we're actually closing our entire ground transportation center, relocating all of our taxis, shuttles, employee shuttles. We're having to change the exit of our parking operation and all of our regular personal vehicles that are coming to drop off or pick up folks there on the whole south side of our half of our terminal building will be redirected to a smaller lower level road or to the other side of our domestic terminal. And we're doing this starting at 5 p.m. Normally we really focus a lot of our impacts to passengers after 9 or 10 at night. But in order to accommodate these 2 cranes this Saturday night, we actually have to begin our impacts much earlier. So we've been working very hard for the last couple of months trying to come up with mitigation strategies and techniques so we can accommodate folks and still keep our airport running efficiently and maintain schedules. These are some of the example or some of the drawings that we've provided to leadership and our internal stakeholders, external stakeholders as well, airline partners, ground transportation partners. This is showing what will happen Saturday night. The top drawing shows our south upper roadway and it's highlighted in red because it will be closed starting at 5 p.m. The yellow passenger movement is shown there for our passengers that have to reach the existing deck. So they still will be able to walk through those closed roadways to the deck. But we show where we're having, pedestrian barricades. The picture below that magenta line shows our lower roadway. This is the only open road that will be open on the south side this Saturday night, and it shows some relocated areas for our Park ATL shuttle pickups. But all of our, as shown in the table at the top right-hand corner, it shows all of the different areas, both the West Grand Transportation Center and our upper roadways. The component of our system that has to be relocated, and then where they're going to be temporarily and at what time they start. So it's a lot of information on this one page that we've been lecturing to all of our stakeholders for months to prepare for Saturday.
Awesome, thank you, Jamie. So yes, that has been a focal point for at least the last 2.5 months as we do this. So again, I think to summarize everything in terms of takeaways for this, it's again, using that collaborative process of stakeholder engagement and building plans with input from different stakeholder groups. What we've done here with the WSP program is, again, see ways that can be done at various stages of project construction and not just at the end as you get ready to hand over. With that, the operational coordination point, really it gives all of our construction projects a focal point to deal with in terms of looking at their activities. It does reduce project conflicts, which is great for them, but more importantly, it helps us here at the airport maintain operations, which is first and foremost the most critical thing as we try to construct in the middle of a small campus that houses the world's busiest airport. And as we look at the operational readiness component of this, it's really designed to minimize passenger disruptions, keep the construction project on schedule, and make sure that they're maintaining their productivity. But I think the key, the last thing, which is really important for us as ORAT, is it increases the stakeholder engagement and ownership, because our stakeholders are involved at all different aspects of this. And so, again, it's getting their buy-in early on and continuing to increase that as we go throughout the process, ultimately getting to the completion and opening of new facilities. So again, I think those are probably the most critical aspects of what we talked about in the webinar. So I'd like to open it up for questions. I see we've got some in the chat. Let me address some of these first and foremost. We did have a question about concept of operations, and are these defined before the changes are planned? We try to, obviously, with the start of all new construction projects, look at the concept of operations for the project as a whole. One of the other things, though, is as we change this, we look at, again, kind of an interim operational concept, in that we may not be able to do things 100% the same way. So in some cases, we've had to get very creative with contractors about space that they can capture in order to ensure that passengers can move safely and efficiently in and around construction. So I guess it's a simple answer to that. We do consider it. It is most definitely at the forefront, but it also morphs and changes as the project drives different impacts. I think that's the easiest way to say that. Another question we've got has to do with the APM trains per hour. So right now we run on about a 90-second headway, I believe. So that is a lot of trains through the system. I believe ATL runs one of the top 10 transit systems in the world in terms of number of people it moves. Currently, we run, I think, there are 4 train pairs or 4 train cars that run within the system. What we're trying to do is get about a 19% improvement in that, so we can add additional passenger capacity to that and ultimately introduce, new trains into the system, and again, improve our times by roughly 19%. That is the question there. And, we are going to be adding new cars to the system itself. So those are in production right now. So in order for us to really take full advantage of the extension, we are going to add an additional 14 cars into our system, and then ultimately do a car replacement program as well. So let me read some of the other questions. So one of them is the ORAT operational coordination and interim readiness concept scalable and transferable to smaller airports? And I think the simple answer to that is 100% yes. The process itself is really designed for non-greenfield work. And so I think there's large hub, there's small airports that all deal with this on a regular basis. And I think, again, that is one of the things that is part of the WSP process has been, how do we scale ORAT up and down and make it work, understanding that there's impacts not only at the back end of a project as you transition, but throughout its life cycle and throughout its evolution. Another question is, what is the size of the ATL ORAT team? Jamie, do you want to answer that one?
Sure. We are a small but mighty team. We've got 5 members, and then we work with a good core group of airport stakeholders that consist of about 25 people that have regular day jobs, but they're very active in our ORAT process. So there are 5 of us that manage it and oversee it, but we work really closely with hundreds of stakeholders, but a nice core group of about 20 that truly understand our ORAT process and understand their role in it. And we've enjoyed great success with our stakeholders that way. Hopefully, and we need to grow as our program grows and impacts increase. That 5 should get even larger.
All right. It looks like we have another question. What work requires an operational mitigation plan? I think again, we look at it as anytime a regular operation is closed, relocated, moved to a temporary location, or it requires a passenger disruption. That's at the point at which we will develop a mitigation plan. Some of these durations are extremely short. As Jamie mentioned in her case study discussion, we're dealing again this Saturday with something that is 12 hours long, but we've spent 2.5 months on it. We're dealing with some that are longer, where we will shut a gate and move an airline off of it for a series of 3 to 4 months. And then there's some that are much longer, where we'll shut roadways down for up to 2 years. So I think anytime you look at that, it's not necessarily within a defined box. And I think that's where, the assistance of, the ORAT team and in our case, WSP, helps navigate folks and guide them through the process and look at different parts of this and how the project may impact folks, and they may not notice it or they may not plan for it. It's more than just notifying them of an impact. It's really actively developing a plan in collaboration with the stakeholders to mitigate the impacts as best possible. We know we're not going to be able to fully overcome them, which is just because of the constraints of the construction, but the goal is to mitigate them to the best extent possible in a way that minimizes passenger and airline and operational disruption. So I think that is probably the best discussion and the best way to answer that question. So so the next question is, how do you tackle the challenge of doing ORAT trials after commissioning and not on top of, and do your contractors appreciate the difference? I think that's it's always difficult sequencing that we're able to do some trials, if they're non-system related during the commissioning process. But I think, again, for a lot of systems and stuff, we do get squeezed, and I think everybody realizes that the flexibility at the back end of the process has to be integral and has to be maintained as best possible. But the system in commissioning really takes precedent. Ultimately, the training and stuff that we do may squeeze trials and may squeeze the ability to do full-blown exercises and simulations. And that's just where the ORAT team working with stakeholders has to be able to adapt to that reality and, again, do the best job within a very limited window sometimes. There's another question, can we provide specific examples of operational, commercial, legal risk identified and mitigated through the ORAT process? So I think as we look at this from an operational standpoint, this is something that is very realistic, as we showed in the case studies. How do we move people throughout the building while we're doing construction? That's not easy to do in some cases, as we showed in the first case study on the canopy construction, where we have significant aspects of the roadway system closed and we have to move people vertically up and down to different levels. That is by far our most significant challenge, because our airport, as most airports are, can be very intimidating, and people are very unfamiliar with changes and as navigating signage and whatnot. So again, that is hard to do. From a commercial standpoint, there are times where we have to take out commercial areas, whether it's concessions locations or airline offices. We're in the process of doing that right now for some future work, where we've impacted baggage service offices, airline ticketing offices, lost and found areas. So we've had to, again, come up with interim plans to move people to, in some cases, newly created areas, in some places repurposed areas, so that we have the space to do construction. So there's all the enabling process that goes on that I think makes it, again, where the interim operational readiness and how we do that and how we make these multiple moves to support what is eventually the end product. From a legal standpoint, I'm struggling with that one only because I guess in some cases we've had to deal with different jurisdictions. And so we've had to create plans that address our interface with those other agencies, whether it comes to tax revenue, legal risks, or in some cases just memorandums of understanding between different groups about how we respond, say in the case of an emergency, or how roadway systems are impacted both in a short-term and in a long-term situation. So that's probably the best example I can come up with for a legal risk.
ADA compliance as well.
Yes, 100%. ADA compliance is something that we have encountered, and we always make sure to include the ADA aspect of all of it, whether it's interim or, Jamie, that's a great point, or in the final condition, we are always looking at access for those with disabilities. So that is a key point as well. At this point, I don't see any additional questions. If you do have any, our contact details are shown on the slide here. So please feel free to contact Jamie or myself. We sincerely appreciate everyone joining and being part of the webinar. And thank you. And at this point, we will close the session.